Hello, listeners and readers of AwardsWatch.com. This is the AwardsWatch Podcast, episode 205. I'm the executive editor, Ryan McQuade, and joining me today is Zach Laws.
Hello.
And that's it. Nobody else here this week. Nobody wanted to hang with us, Zach. I guess they're not, maybe they're all on their Eras tour or whatever.
Yeah,
or,
we don't need anybody else.
Yeah, we're good enough. You know what I mean?
We know everyone is hanging out at Taylor Swift's concert.
Everyone's just a Travis Kelce right now, and they're just hanging out in a movie theater, or they're doing far more interesting things this weekend than talking to us, which is a shame. But
there's nothing more interesting than talking with us.
But we're awesome. Yeah. So we're gonna carry the torch this week in honor of the Exorcist believer, David Gordon Green's latest trasterpiece. We're going to talk about our top 5 best/worst franchise reboots of all time. I'm really looking forward to talking with Zach about that. Should be some really fun, interesting film/moments that we can talk about. But I wanted to give our listeners a little bit of an update to something that happened a couple of months ago, and that is the summer movie box office draft. Now, the last time we talked about this, which was probably like 3 months ago at this point, Team Ryan was in the lead. But, this thing 3 months ago happened called Barbenheimer. Mm-hmm. And Barbie made $1.4 billion. And which nobody expected. I don't think we all knew it would be probably successful, but no one expected it to be the number one movie of the summer.
Yeah.
And that really helped Eric's team, even with Haunted Mansion, that's their bomb pick. And so, scary indeed.
Speaking of bad horror remakes.
Exactly. Even with that, they were still able to pull it. Last time we pulled the numbers, they were about $50 to $60 million ahead. And this was around early September, and there has not been a surge at the box office for those movies that were picked since. So we can only gather that the lead has probably stayed about the same based off of that. Now, we could have held this until January when Oppenheimer gets re-released, but that just wouldn't be fair to everyone out there when they release the 3 hour and 1 minute cut of Oppenheimer. But no, I want to just say that congratulations to Eric's team. They will be picking something soon-ish by the end of the year that we will review at the top of the year. My team, something bad, something good. It doesn't have to be bad. But of course it probably will be something that will be punished into watching.
Could be this movie we're going to talk about this week.
It could be this one. I haven't seen it, and I'm probably not going to unless they pick it, which would be the Exorcist believer. But I do want to make one thing pretty clear from the summer movie box office draft is that the one thing that we didn't see coming was something like Elementals or Elements or whatever Elementals, right?
That movie, Elemental, I think.
Elemental. Yeah. We didn't expect that movie to have the legs that it did. It was kind of a wild story because when it first got, it didn't get selected by either team, but it carried its box office weight throughout the whole season. It just kind of lingered, and ultimately it became like a small little hit for Pixar, which is great for them. Good word of mouth that spread on that. Mission Impossible lost a ton of money. Yeah. Indiana Jones lost probably a ton of money. But Spider-Verse was a big hit. I do say so myself. I called that one in the draft. But I think even more than Barbie's success, I think, and we've all talked about this, is the $950 million that Oppenheimer has made to date, which proves 2 points, is that Christopher Nolan is the king of the world in terms of directors making original properties. For a 3-hour biopic to make $950 million proves that it was far from a Floppenheimer than what Dan and Nicole and Eric and everyone on that team thought it would be. And so it feels good to have that at least be the one victory that I get out of all this, is that I told you all that clips from that show don't always age well. Much like my pick of the Meg as well, too.
But, yeah, as we're being petty.
But I'm also like, the Meg 2 was one of the worst reviewed films of the summer and didn't make it nearly as much as we thought it would, but it kind of broke even. Gran Turismo and Haunted Mansion were kind of decent bomb picks. Haunted Mansion more so of a bomb pick than Gran Turismo. Gran Turismo kind of made its money back, which was interesting.
It was crazy.
Yeah. But congratulations again to Eric's team. I'm super excited or horrified by whatever they're going to pick. Zach, are you ready for whatever they pick?
Sure. I would just say that, I know that of the people on our team, that I and Sophia have seen the new Exorcist, and it would just be cruel to make us sit through it again. I know you guys are like, oh, okay, how do we punish these folks? But just keep in mind, have a heart, have a soul, dare I say, in honor of this horrendous movie. You don't have to be so petty and cruel as to make us sit through that again. So
but they could. You never know.
They could. I'm just saying. I would never do that to you guys.
Would you rather watch The Exorcist Believer again or The Son?
Well, I will say I've never seen The Son, so
I think you might have.
I would lean towards that.
It's not much better from what I've heard. So
I did not see that movie because the night that the screening I was going to go to, it was my niece's first birthday. And it was like in one of those movies where like the guy can see into his future, where he's like all those events that he missed because of work.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I am not going to miss this to watch The Son.
That's a good call. That's a good call. I don't think I would miss much in the world if the other option was The Son. I would be like, oh, option A sounds a hell of a lot better. A root canal. All that stuff.
My driver's license renewed. Sure.
Exactly. Sitting at the DMV is a lot better than Florian Zeller's follow.
Going to Taylor Swift's Eras tour. That would be.
That's in a theater or at the live concert. I've seen already some videos of that. Cultish event that's happening in AMC theaters, and all I have to say is thank God I don't have any AMC theaters near my house.
I just canceled my Stub subscription too because it wasn't worth it to
smart
to go to that.
He went to Regal.
Yeah.
But we're here to really talk about our top 5 best and worst franchise reboots. But you've alluded to it. You did see David Gordon Green's latest film, The Exorcist Believer, and you also reviewed it on the website. Zach, can you tell the lovely people at home what the title of that review is called?
It was The Exorcist Believer. Will the devil ever give David Gordon Green his soul back? A+ review. The film is not an A+, but that review title is an A+. Thank you. It was. It came to me in like a trance, I should say.
Were you possessed?
I was possessed, I think, as I was leaving the theater, contemplating the horrors that I had just witnessed. I thought it was quite bad, this movie. And I would say, in all fairness, the first hour of the film showed some promise. And I was sitting there with my little notepad, and I wrote down, "Good?" ?
Little, not tiny. Little,
tiny, yeah.
Is it tiny?
Tiny. My notebook?
Yeah.
It's average,
Okay. It's like a handy dandy notebook?
Yeah. It's above average size.
Oh, okay.
It's like a,
I feel like we're not talking about a notebook anymore, but okay.
Hey, now. I'll save that for the
after hour show. Yeah. Anyway, continue.
And literally from the moment that the two girls are seen to be possessed, the movie begins to go downhill.
So when like the movie turns into an Exorcist movie, is when the movie starts to suck.
Yeah, and like to clarify, it's like, so the first hour of the movie is about these two girls going missing, right?
So it's like prisoners,
yeah, and there's some actually like really kind of interesting filmmaking choices that David Gordon Green uses, where it's like trying to create, a sense of dread and horror out of the everyday. He's using a lot of the same kind of like stylistic techniques that Friedkin used, like lots of zoom lenses and things like that. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, he might have actually taken the correct lessons from this. And like, as soon as the girls come back, it starts to go off the rails. And the moment that Ellen Burstyn comes into the film, it truly becomes a disaster. And I didn't want to write about this in my review because I didn't want to spoil it for the people who were looking forward to this, all 20 people who were looking forward to this movie. But the way that her character is disposed of was just so disrespectful and so horrific that it just soured me on the rest of the movie. And then it gets to the exorcism scene. And that is so badly bungled. There's no exorcist in the film. There's not a single religious figure in this film that is given any kind of characterization. I can't tell you their names. It's like a hodgepodge of religious.
It's like
it makes sense because they're in the South, and so it wouldn't just be Catholic priests, right? And
actually that would make sense.
Yeah,
if they did, because they're in the South.
But I'm saying, like, that's like Baptists, Southern Baptist priests, and kind of like voodoo witch doctors. There's someone in there, and but like these are not like real characters. What the movie has to say about religion is not clearly defined, and the ending is unsatisfactory. And I thought to myself, I cannot believe that there's going to be at least two more of these coming out.
And that they paid what, $400 million for the rights to this?
Yeah, $400 million. Now, David Gordon Green has said that he might not direct the next two.
Might be actually a blessing in disguise.
Yeah,
as the religious folks would say.
As I said in my review, I hope that David Gordon, if he is, I don't know what is possessing him to make these films, both this and the Halloween remakes. Yeah, I think that's money.
Yeah.
Perhaps he's like told himself that he's paying tribute to his heroes.
Man, well,
I would just say that I hope that he takes a page from William Friedkin's book.
Oh,
and just looks at how he ended his career after a few decades of trying to do the studio thing, and he'd have like intermittent bangers like To Live and Die in LA, coupled with things like The Guardian or but he came roaring back in his 70s with Bug and Killer Joe and the Kane Mutiny Court Martial. I think that if David Gordon Green really wants to pay tribute to his heroes, he should maybe do that. He should maybe stop concerning himself with being a big studio director and remind himself of what made him want to be a filmmaker in the first place.
Yeah, I feel like with every massive studio project, we're losing the guy that made George Washington.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this with you a little bit tonight before we got on, which is, I think that for anyone that is worried about modern filmmakers taking the jump to the studios, and not everyone is going to be Greta Gerwig, and they're not going to be Christopher Nolan. They're not going to have these. They're actually, honestly, the exceptions to the rule.
Yeah,
and they have been, because for the most part, when promising directors, indie directors, go to the studio system, they lose themselves, and they either have to go like Friedkin in a very small direction, or they stay in that lane if it becomes successful, and they can't get out of it until they've run out of juice and run a property into the ground. So I know that he can make good movies. He's made, didn't he make Joe, right? Joe, which was a very good movie, and
Stronger.
Stronger. So he can make these intimate dramas with these great performances and get great performances out of people. I think it's really funny that you're mentioning that, like, he's paying homage to Friedkin when there's literally like quotes from Friedkin right before he died saying that, like, this guy David Gordon Green's going to make a sequel to my essentially a masterpiece, and I hope I'm not alive to see it. And then, like, he literally died a couple months later. And
like himself into not being it.
He's like, I'm not going to be around for that press tour, I'll tell you that. But his lasting memory is another strong, fantastic case as to why he was one of the best directors of his generation, and someone that refused to compromise and found a way to make the movies he wanted to make. And do it in an interesting way, because the K Mutiny Court Martial is a fascinating movie to talk about. Maybe we'll be talking about it towards the end of the year. Some of the better films could make top 20 lists. It's a fascinating way to remake a movie nowadays. That one, and this is the polar opposite from what a lot of people said. It's made decent chunk of money, not like gangbusters at the box office, but whatever. We'll see how it turns out. But as we transition to our top 5, I wanted to just clarify what a reboot versus a remake is for the audience, because I feel like a lot of our audience is going to go, well, why isn't that movie in there, or why isn't this movie in there? Because, like, a reboot for me, Zach, is a movie that there's a franchise that's existed and it's run out of steam. And in this case, for better or for worse, a movie was made to revitalize or to bring that into a modern lens. That's why I think a lot of these will be more modern than it is like older films. And they were either very successful in reestablishing or rebranding the lore of that franchise, or they were unsuccessful in doing that, to the point in which they drove their franchise further and further into the ground, as opposed to a remake that that is just a one-off movie that is remade from something else. I think of, like, A Star Is Born didn't make a franchise, but every 20 years we get one. You know what I mean? Or, I'm trying to think of other remakes that have happened. Like Nightmare Alley, I guess, is something recent where it's not trying to make a franchise out of it. It's just a remake, a one-off. So just wanted clarification for that, because if there are some movies on this list where people are like, well, that's not that's a remake, or that's a reboot, or whatever, like, just wanted to clarify what a reboot is for some people that might not be familiar with it. But Zach, does that sound about right in how you conducted your list here, or are there some remakes on your list?
Well, you're going to kill me, because I don't know that any of the ones that I put on my best of list would qualify as a reboot necessarily, as more of a remake.
God damn it. So,
I
understood this assignment. This is why communication we all have, like, at least some form of communications degree.
Well, I should say, okay, I'm sure that a lot of these movies on my list were intended to be made into franchises. I know at least one of them had a sequel.
Okay.
So,
but that's okay.
So there's that.
Yes.
I have trouble reading small print sometimes.
Okay, so. That's fine. Zach gets a pass this week. He's the only one here. So
I know. Yeah, I came on here, and the reason I wanted to come on was because when we plan these episodes out weeks in advance, folks, just so you know, and I was looking at the episode title and I thought, horror reboots, and that doesn't sound too interesting to me. And then I realized I'm thinking like a film Twitter person, because I'm not thinking back to the 20th century of films, right? Like there's a ton of great movies that would qualify as horror remakes or reboots that have become classics in their own right. And when I realized that, I thought this is actually a really great topic to discuss, you know, because what I looked for in these films was, do these films simply rehash the same thing that their predecessor did? Or are they reimagining them within the context of the time that they're now being made in? Are they, you know, simply rebooting, rehashing all this stuff? Or have they found a way to make it a great movie in its own right? And I think that's where this new Exorcist actually fails, because so many of the scares in it are just reheated, you know, gags that we remember from the original. We're like, okay, there's the spinning head, you know, there's the crucifix with blood on it, there's, you know, the vomit, there's all, you know, like, it's just all this stuff that was done better in the Friedkin film. So then it's like, what reason did you have really to remake this? And I found that, like, with the 5 films that I came up with on my list, there was a reason for these films to exist.
All right. With that being said, let's get into this list. So you're number 5, Zach.
Okay, so I had basically like a top 6.
Okay.
And it was really hard for me to cut one of these.
Yeah.
So, and I'll talk about that one at length after we're done. We do our runners up.
Mm-hmm.
My number 5 is a film from 1978.
Okay.
It is a remake of a film from 1956.
Okay.
A great Don Siegel, low budget sci-fi horror thriller that was about fear of communism and McCarthyism, and was remade into another brilliant film by the great Philip Kaufman. This is Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Ah, yes.
First of all, I knew that our friend and co-host Sophia Simonello would kill us if we didn't talk about a horror movie from the 70s starring Donald Sutherland. So I had to choose that for that reason. It was interesting rewatching this film during COVID, because it's a film that's about fear of a disease lurking within people that you cannot see, and the fear that you're going to catch it yourself. And like, you know, like I said, the original film was very much a metaphor for McCarthyism, right? Fear of, you know, like the fear of people being outsiders, you know, thinking outside of the box, or, you know, this sort of like this move towards conformity that happened in the 1950s. And, you know, the things that Kaufman's dealing with in this film are still as relevant in 1978 as they were in 1956, right? Because you think about it, it was at the time of, like, you know, the anti-war movement, and we were moving towards Reaganism and a push towards conservatism, you know, and, you know, aside from all of that stuff and how effective all of the, like, scares are, it's also just, like, really funny and really sprightly. And it's a great San Francisco movie too, which I always appreciate. And yeah, I mean, it does a great job of doing what I think all great remakes should do, which is to recontextualize and see what can you find about it that, you know, like, what reasons should this film exist outside of just it's a known property.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it also kind of does. It is a big property. It's been made a couple times. I think if kind of falls in the middle, right, of this reboot remake sort of thing too. So, and yeah, 70s Donald Sutherland. Just the guy is working on a different level, I think. And to make, he's making a lot of dramas at this time, and then also to make this, it's really interesting, like you're mentioning, it's very much a political sci-fi commentary, and it's a different way of doing it, which I feel like we don't get a lot as much nowadays with these. I feel like it's all about the scares. Like there was the invasion, right? Is that what the Daniel Craig, Nicole Kidman one, and that one has less of the commentary and more of the sort of it has the paranoia, I think, in that movie, but it doesn't have the bite that this movie has. So no, Zach, I love that film. I do want to say that all Zach's picks are going to be very positive, because Zach's a very positive guy. I also am I'm doubling up this week, and I'm going to talk about franchises in their reboots that I really love, and most of them are very modern. Because I will save mine, the reboots or the remakes, for I think a different episode. But I also have franchise disasters or flops or worst here, and I think that it'll also be a good memory lane piece for us to all remember. So, my number 5 is a movie that came out early in the last decade, and it was a kind of a complete surprise. It was one of those cases where I think you can't judge a trailer judge a film by its trailer, because the trailer for it wasn't particularly appetizing. And I think the franchise itself had been really kicked in the pants by what you could describe as a bad reboot beforehand, done by the hands of Tim Burton, and that was Planet of the Apes. So when Rise of the Planet of the Apes comes out, I was pleasantly surprised by the emotionality that was brought to Caesar, and this coming of age story, essentially, of how he becomes the leader of the apes that we know through the mythology of the original films, but also too how systematically broken he becomes from this loving, caring house with James Franco and John Lithgow, and essentially gets handed off and is broken and beaten. And I think that Planet of the Apes has always been this massive it's been a commentary about race and society and America and everything that's going on. And I think while those movies maybe got a little bit worse as they did go on in the original, and they went a little bit less from that original definitely is talking about that. At least I think those first 3 films are definitely speaking to our times, and were political pieces. And I think this one it definitely has a less bite there, but it also, for me, has it has an environmental bite to it as well. It has, shockingly, what now seems like a very a virus forward approach. It was very like, you saw this movie come out in the same year as Contagion, and I think you didn't really want to go outside. And so I think that that sort of reboot for that franchise was a pleasant surprise, much needed. And then we've got Dawn and War of the Planet of the Apes, which I think are 2 immaculate sequels that go alongside it, and really gave us then this sort of resurgence of Matt Reeves, who then was able to partner that into go making his version of the Batman. And so now they're kind of like in this middle nowhere land with this, because this trilogy ended so perfectly with Caesar's story, and now they're I think making a spinoff or something like that. I don't know, but I still think that like this is one of the better trilogies we've had in the last decade or so, and it started with this one. So that's my good pick. Zach, I don't know what you think of Rise of the Planet of the Apes.
Oh, I like it a lot. I love the Matt Reeves ones, Dawn and War. I think those are just absolutely stellar and bleak.
Yeah.
But Rise is, like you said, I mean, it was so surprising how good that movie was, considering what we had come to expect from a Planet of the Apes movie.
Man,
like
that Burton film leaves you just like
really
punched in the face.
really bad. And like, I think that it was like what we're saying. It's like, what is the reason to remake this?
Yeah.
And part of it was just the fact that you could use this new motion capture technology to not just make it like people in monkey suits who were like very obviously, you know, not they were obviously like actors in heavy makeup.
Yeah.
And there
Rick
was always this
Baker
kind of
getting like work for years based off
very
of this,
good, very good work, by the way.
very
But
great
like
work, but just
a campier kind of thing, right?
yeah.
This was like you can actually make realistic looking apes and, you know, have Caesar, you know, give Caesar more humanity in a weird way.
Ground it a little bit more.
Yes, ground it. That's it. Yeah. So yeah, I think these are great.
And then just shout out to, of course, Andy Serkis, but then I think even Toby Kebbell in the sequels as well, and in this film is too, like incredible motion capture performances, and was really leading the charge as to like the conversation that is still ongoing of how much of the actors gets the credit for motion capture versus the visual effects artists. And I think it's the whole team, but it definitely helps when you have somebody like Andy Serkis who has been notoriously at the forefront of making these performances pop. Like, you know, the guy can be Gollum, King Kong, Caesar, Snoke, you know, he can be anything. And play it from such a young age to such a man, essentially. Because like when you see War of the Planet of the Apes, there's some bleak war scenes in that, with his dealing with his family. You can feel Serkis's performance in that too. So, my number 5 worst franchise reboot. I'm not saying that these first 2 movies were any good. Okay. But when you reboot something because you want to make a gritty sort of action superhero movie, it needs to come with a vision, and it needs to come with something that that has all the right pieces. And when 2015 hit around and Fan Four Stick, as the title suggested, but what it's really called is Fantastic Four, came out, and Josh Trank was at the helm of this movie. This was following Chronicle. You had a ton of things going on behind the scenes with this. Trank's just terrible behavior, the screenplay being a mess, this cast being put together pretty much having no chemistry, the movie being taken away from Trank at a certain point, this rush cut. What we got was a jumbled mess of a movie and a colossal fail, to the point in which this property now has been sold to Marvel, with now the most annoying day-to-day Twitter rumors about who is going to play essentially some of the 4 biggest characters in Marvel comic book history. And I'm not saying that the Chris Evans and Jessica Alba was it Jessica Biel? No, it was Jessica Alba.
It was Jessica Alba. Yeah.
It was Jessica Alba versions were great, but they are like masterpieces in compared to this jumbled mess that actually makes no sense whatsoever when you're watching it. And it's truly one of the biggest messes in modern cinema history. And it killed a property to the point where I don't really know who's directing it, who's going to want to step into these shoes, especially with Marvel and the way they are now. But it just seems like a doomed property, and it really hit rock bottom with this. And so I don't know. Did you ever see that movie, Zach? Did you ever watch it?
No, I never saw it, and it really does make me think back to, like, you know, why don't they ever get people like Sam Raimi to do these movies? You know.
Well, they did
actually. I'm like, they did, yeah, and it was one of the better Marvel movies of recent years.
Yeah,
just, like, in general, why not get people who actually have an affinity for this material and some filmmaking talent? I understand why, because it's cheaper to get somebody like Trank, or at least in theory it was. But yeah. Never saw it, no interest in never seeing it, and I guess I'll have no reason to I just forget how stacked that cast was.
Yeah, you're talking about Miles Teller, Kate Mara, Jamie Bell,
Michael B.
Jordan, and the bad guy Toby Kebbell, like I talked about in Rise of the Planet of the Apes. That's my connection. By the way, most of these, the good picks and the bad picks that I'm going to pick, they have a connection. I was a good boy in connecting everything together. So that's the connection of that, is a good kind of motion capture performance from Toby Kebbell in Rise of the Planet of the Apes. And then, of course, something that's just one of the worst villains I've ever seen in a movie. Like, if Team Eric is thinking about something horrible, this might be one of those picks. So it's truly a bad.
Put it in their head.
I'm just giving them ideas at this point. You're number 4, sir.
Okay, my number, and the connective theme in all 5 of my picks is that I thought the assignment was horror remakes, and so my number 4 horror remake is a film from 1986. It's a remake of a film from I can't remember the exact year that the original came out, but it was from the 50s, 58, I want to say. It was a remake of a very silly science fiction horror film. Speaking of movies with actors wearing makeup, this was a movie in which the lead actor was wearing a giant insect head for most of its runtime. And that got remade into a body horror classic.
Yeah, I know where you're
by
going.
the great David Cronenberg. I'm talking about The Fly.
Oh, yeah.
This is absolutely a movie that is better than the one it's a remake of. Again, like, all right, why do you remake this movie? Well, you have a different take on it by David Cronenberg, this man who is interested in body horror. His whole career is built around like nasty things that happen to the human anatomy.
Yeah.
And so, whereas in the original, it was their heads that swapped. In this remake, you are watching him transform into a human fly, and it's all very gross and nasty and Cronenbergy. To me, the most surprising thing about this film, and what makes it more than just a great horror film, is that there is a profoundly moving love story at the center of it. And if you were to take this same exact story and make turning a fly into being diagnosed with cancer, it would still work. I mean, it would be, there wouldn't be scenes of Jeff Goldblum spitting onto John Getz's hand and melting it with his acid spit.
Hell yeah.
But there's the same kind of thought of when you love someone profoundly and you watch them get sick and suffer, and at a certain point, they are no longer the person that you loved, and you have to let go of them. Most of us can relate to that. At some point in our life, we've had to deal with that, whether it's with our significant other, our parent, or a sibling, and that to me was the brilliant thing about this film, that Cronenberg saw the potential for that and made it something more than what it could have been.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, on certain days, I feel like this could be his best movie. I think it's like, it's Dead Ringers, those are the ones that are kind of competing. But it's like, if you were to say like what you think of as a David Cronenberg movie, this is the best example of that.
Yeah.
I love it so much. And one of my favorite Howard Shore scores ever.
I love that movie. I love Cronenberg. What a good dude. Just making some weird movies, but that are completely unique to his own. Another guy that is like Freakin', just kind of didn't want to play the studio norms and has found avenues to make his own movies, and it takes some years in between. And his modern stuff's been really fascinating to kind of watch. And then you see something like Crimes of the Future last year, and it kind of goes back to kind of speaking to things from this era of his filmmaking. I have immense respect for him. You know, kind of looking at my list, Zach.
Yeah.
I think they are kind of remakes and reboots. So you know what? I think we kind of did this all correctly, and there's no need to say what they're all kind of saying, because no, I'm kind of looking at it right now, and it's like, well, you can kind of justify all these as remakes and reboots, but my number 4, best and worst, kind of tie in together perfectly, and their tie-in is the person that it's producing it, and one doesn't happen, I think, without the other. And I think when you make a movie about Bruce Wayne, you are essentially remaking that story over and over and over again. But I think what Christopher Nolan did with Batman Begins was take it away from the sort of Joel Schumacher schlock that franchise was really needing a different shift, and taking it to more grounded level, and knowing Nolan making it more of a crime epic and a crime origin film. And by doing that, he was able to level the playing field to then level up and create, in that next film, one of the greatest comic book movies of all time. But I think Batman Begins on his own is a great reboot, remake of the story that is Bruce Wayne, Batman, his origin, this sort of, you know, the stuff with Ra's al Ghul at the beginning, and you know, his conversations with Liam Neeson and how he's born there, and then how he slowly builds up the suit and everything. It kind of felt like we hadn't seen a lot of comic books do this at this moment in time, and it felt fresh to do it. Now we see him every other 6 months have an origin story like this, but they don't feel as, I think, truly carefully made as Nolan makes most of his movies. Also has a terrific Christian Bale playing both Bruce Wayne and Batman, great villains, from Liam Neeson performances, Cillian Murphy, you know, Gary Oldman as Lieutenant Gordon in that film, and then obviously Morgan Freeman and Michael Caine. Katie Holmes is in it as well. It's a stacked cast, but there was some momentum that came from that. It was like, oh, Batman doesn't have to be Arnold Schwarzenegger puns and bat nipples anymore. It can be a more grounded, realistic take on this. Swing that then to the other side of the decade, when he's a producer at the time. I believe he also gets like a story credit for this film. But what happens when a movie like this gets made, it's going to be the recurring theme, I think, of the list, is it gets remade for a different character that fundamentally is not the same character as the one that it's being remade for. And it's done to build something that I think has been one of the biggest disasters in movie making history in the last 25 years. And that's been the DCEU, and that was Man of Steel, which I think, one, birthed the Snyderverse, which was terrible. If one person in this world does not need a universe of their movies, it's Zack Snyder. But as a film too, it completely, I think, destroys the remaking or the rebuilding of carrying the torch from the Christopher Reeve era, and then the kind of terrible attempt from the Bryan Singer Superman Returns film of trying to continue that story on. And it turns Superman, who is one of the more optimistic characters and in sort of fun characters, and turns it into this really gritty action film that has a lot of just emotions that you wouldn't expect in a Superman movie. And it feels like a lot of it is set up to then to just create this universe that we get later on. It's a massive misstep. It's one of the truly worst films I've ever had the experience of seeing, because the action, when you see it too, as opposed to in The Dark Knight and in Batman Begins, I think that's clear action. It's good action. It's, you know, it's suspenseful. There's moments of pure horror in there as well. That movie, Man of Steel, is just CGI thrown up at the wall, and it's just not a great property. And Spawn than a movie franchise that is still as having to now be reboot again. Is movies are not making any money. Like it's bad. It's bad. So you take the good of the DC properties and then of course the bad portions of those as well. So
yeah, I don't remember a ton about Man of Steel. I guess it's better than Batman versus Superman. That's
it is.
I can say about it.
But then that movie being successful then does spawn Batman versus Superman, which is one of the. That's another terrible movie, and then of course the Snyder Cut and everything that's come with it.
Watched during COVID and found to be just dreadful. The thing about it, and I will say, Zack Snyder is maybe like the only superhero movie director in recent years who's had like a good take on the Scorsese stuff, where he's just like, he's Martin Scorsese, he can say whatever he wants, and like
he's like, he's talking about my films. Okay, cool. Yeah,
I don't want to beat up on him too much for that reason, just because. But yeah, it is like it is fascinating because I think a lot of the wrong lessons were learned from the success of the Dark Knight trilogy, and we're still sort of seeing the repercussions of that to this day. And like,
it's a good lesson.
Exactly. And I tell you what, it is like, I wish that a lot of the DC EU movies coming out today were as good as Man of Steel, and that wasn't a very good movie.
No, but I wish a lot of popcorn films were as good and entertaining and swift as Batman Begins.
Exactly. That's
because that movie has good humor in it. It moves like it
looks great.
Yeah, Nolan's kind of first attempt at a big scale thing that he'd never done before, so he's just kind of like throwing a little bit of this, throw a little bit of that in there. He's kind of learning how to be a big filmmaker on the fly in a movie like that, and it's not perfect, but it's got a really good enough story, and it's got that good sentimentality that I think also Nolan has too, with Bruce and his parents and Alfred and everything there too. So, which is kind of devoid from the Burton films, I think, as much. And I think he loved those movies. So he kind of used those movies as like examples of what to do. And I think, of course, the Schumacher movies as to what not to do.
I love those Schumacher movies.
I like them. They're good schlock, but
you name me one movie these days that has a line as funny as Arnold Schwarzenegger saying, "The Iceman cometh.
Ice to see you." You know what I mean? Like, the amount of have you ever played the drinking game, Zach, where you take a drink every time in that movie Arnold Schwarzenegger says a pun?
Yeah, I think I was totally wasted by the end of it.
You'll be totally wasted for sure. You're number 3, sir.
Well, actually, it kind of ties into your pick, because this is a property that's been remade many times. In fact, I'm going to have like 2 versions of it on this list.
Okay.
So the number 3 is from 1992.
Okay.
One of the earliest examples of this was all the way back in the silent era. The one that people, I think, most easily identify with was 1931. It was the film that kicked off the Universal horror movie as a franchise.
Okay.
And this remake was from one of our great directors, man who made The Godfather, Godfather Part 2.
I know where you're going
Apocalypse
with this.
Now, Conversation. 4 of the greatest films ever made. This would be my 5th favorite film of his. It's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah, I think it's like my 5th as well. Yeah.
So
it says a lot when this is like your 5th best movie ever made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because this movie rules.
Yeah.
I've been a fan of this movie ever since I was a kid. I was the first horror movie I remember seeing was actually the Bela Lugosi Dracula. And I became obsessed with the genre because of that. And I would watch all of the Hammer horror films. I'd watch all the Universal horror films. I just couldn't get enough of that stuff. And so when I saw Bram Stoker's Dracula for the first time, it was obviously like an instant favorite of mine, right? And what I love about this movie is that, first of all, it's a much more faithful adaptation of the Dracula novel, right? And Coppola is a much different filmmaker from Todd Browning. And, he's much more operatic.
Yes.
He's much grander in his ambitions. And so this film is like that. And what I also love about it is that even though, he has the ability to use a lot of modern special effects and CGI, there's a ton of great old filmmaking techniques that he employs. A lot of like double exposures, a lot of irises, a lot of painted backdrops. His use of color is incredibly expressionistic. His sets and his costumes are all, grandiose and of a scale that you could never imagine. And the performances are just to the hilt. I love Gary Oldman as old Dracula. I remember that used to scare the shit out of me as a child. Just, with his like long fingernails and his hair done up like that and a bun. And I even love Keanu in this movie.
Oh, Keanu rules. Keanu's so good in this movie.
But like, I love too that, much like with The Fly, it's turned into a love story,
Yeah.
It's a story about, the tagline I think was like love never dies. And, you see that it's like, what would cause a man to give his soul to the devil and, vow to return from the dead? Well, the fact that the love of his life was no longer there to win back the love of a woman that he lost.
Yeah.
So, I love this movie.
I love it too. It's actually one of my wife's favorite films. And she loves to watch it around this time. Mm-hmm. And I think Oldman's performance is, for lack of better words, fucking insane. And I think that Hopkins too, as Van Helsing in the movie, he's completely over the top, and it's a madman performance. There's so many performances in it. The makeup work's incredible. The costumes, it's all dialed up to 11, but it also has it's a lot of what I love about this gang of directors that are best friends here with not necessarily Lucas, but Spielberg, Coppola, Scorsese. They have such a respect for the past in their filmmaking. So it's there, but that it doesn't hinder the vision that they're trying to show. And he is trying to show a sexy but violent version of this tale. And that in any moment, a moment of passion could turn into a moment of violence. And I think we haven't since seen a version, I think, of Dracula that has been able to push itself to be like that. Maybe like, a vampire movie like Interview with a Vampire is kind of close to that, but not necessarily the Dracula property. And it's actually really funny that you mention that your Dracula pick is your number 3, because my number 3 is, I think, comes from the same sort of era of these monster movies from Universal that did so well. And I think of a movie from 1999 in The Mummy as the quintessential, just one of those like touchstone films for a lot of us. But it's it is essentially, I think the next 3 films that I'm going to mention feel like movies that we just don't get made anymore. And The Mummy is taking this horror property that is it's of all the classic monster movies, I feel it's the driest in terms of what you can do with it, right? And it elevates it to an action horror film that's quite interesting, very sexy, almost a weird PG-13 cousin to Coppola's film in a lot of ways, but definitely a movie that's having a lot of fun, winking at the camera, has this great performance from both Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, have insane chemistry, opened up a lot of doors for a lot of people into who we are as human beings. But I think a lot about that movie because I think it's such a movie for people of my age, our age, Zach, that got to see this at a very young age and we're like, this is the kind of movie and blockbuster that we love. These sort of sprawling epics, but that are done on these with real great balance of humor and suspense and everything. And then that's balanced, I think, your pick, Dracula, The Mummy. Well, it only can mean that my number 3 worst pick is a reboot that happened that was so bad it destroyed an entire universe. A universe that we only have one photo on record of having, and that is the Dark Universe, and that's Tom Cruise's The Mummy, which is a movie that is a fine film, but it was such a financial bomb. And then you wrap it with it being this movie that's weirdly in between Mission Impossible movies and the Jack Reachers of them all, and Edge of Tomorrow, which are all these very successful vehicles that Tom Cruise has. But every now and then there's an Oblivion, or every now and then there's a Mummy, where the formula doesn't quite work. And then you throw in like it trying to do the DCEU Marvel thing, where Russell Crowe's in this movie playing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And it just doesn't flow with it. And then supposedly, I believe Javier Bardem was supposed to play
Wolfman, maybe?
The Wolfman, I believe, and then Johnny Depp.
Benicio?
Well, no, it was Javier Bardem. Yeah. They had moved off of Benicio in that disaster of a movie,
right?
And then the Invisible Man was supposed to be played by Johnny Depp, and so they have a photo of Depp, Bardem, Sofia Boutella, who plays the Mummy, and then I guess in this version with Cruise, he's like he takes her spirit inside of him or whatever, so he's like her carrier. And then, of course, Russell Crowe. And that photo was released before this movie came out. And then they scrapped the entire project together after the bomb that was this movie. So it's funny that we talk about these two really inventive films, these fun films that, I mean, even The Mummy, it got a couple sequels. I think The Mummy Returns is actually a still very fun film and a great continuation. And then once Rachel Weisz leaves, this entire franchise goes downhill. And that's why they have to kind of reboot it and try to do from the origins of which these two movies came, which is to create a monster universe, because like they all started to form and kind of come together at a certain point. And then they did also come together in like comedies like Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, and Dracula and the Wolfman, and all of them are in that film as well. So there are multiple like crossover events that happened throughout the history in those early part of cinema and everything. But when they've tried to do it now, it feels so made by an algorithm, right, Zach, that it completely falls apart. So these one-offs are much better, probably vehicles for them to do. Like we're going to be supposedly getting a Frankenstein remake from Guillermo del Toro coming out, and it's much better, I think, for directors to influence themselves into those rather than a studio for hire in these products. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny. The Mummy was actually the Brendan Fraser one, I should clarify, was actually on my runners up list of films that for like horror remakes. Because it's a really entertaining movie, and it's so fascinating to think about how much Hollywood has changed in that, like, that movie was like, oh, it's a good B movie entertainment, right? And how much now we wish that there were films like that being made today, as opposed to what happened with the Tom Cruise remake, which is just like the weight of these expectations of like, we have to turn everything into this like multi-film extended universe. as opposed to like, can you just focus on making one good movie?
Exactly. Just make something entertaining for 90 minutes. It's like also like people just forget that the MCU wasn't 32 movies from the initial announcement.
No.
They just needed Iron Man to do well. That's all they needed to do. It was a good movie.
It was a good movie.
Yeah. They had a stinger at the end and they're like, oh, what's that all about? And then they just was one movie at a time. You know what I mean? It wasn't 6 movies at a time, which it is now. Maybe that's their problem, Zach. We'll never know.
Look, I'm no studio executive, but I will take their money and make the decisions.
Listen, they're handing it out evidently for Rotten Tomatoes reviews. So you can just. I don't know if you read about that, but that's something that
I did.
Do,
yeah.
You know I mean? No, we won't do that. That's not who we are. No. You're number 2.
My number 2. All right. So I mentioned that I had 2 films on here that were essentially adapted from the same source material, Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1922, there was an unofficial adaptation made by the great German expressionist filmmaker F.W. Murnau called Nosferatu.
Mm.
In 1979, the great German filmmaker Werner Herzog remade that film on many of the same locations, called it Nosferatu the Vampire, with Klaus Kinski playing the role of Count Orloff, which was originated by Max Schreck, one of the creepiest performances in history.
Yep.
I ask me on any given day, I may say that I like this one better than the Murnau film, and I love the Murnau film. This film really haunts me. If you really want to scare yourself, watch this movie in the middle of the night. It starts off in the catacombs with all those mummified bodies, with the Papa Vol music playing. Herzog, what makes him so fascinating as a filmmaker is that, he is equal parts fiction filmmaker and documentarian.
Yeah.
And he often takes this very realistic approach to these wild stories of crazy people, right? Men who are driven to insane lengths to accomplish a goal, whether it's Aguirre or it's Fitzcarraldo. And that stylistic choice works so well to make this film scary, right? Because, he shoots on a lot of real locations, and, he shot at the same location as the original was shot, for what he called the voodoo of the location. He believes in like the voodoo of locations. And I think that it grounds the film in a certain reality that is more frightening than films that, overtly tell you that it's a horror film. The ending of this movie, which I get, not to spoil a film that's almost 50 years old, but when Count Orloff has been killed, the evil that inhabits him does not die. It passes on to Jonathan Harker. And that haunts me because it's Herzog's way of saying that evil exists in the world, and there's nothing that you can do to defeat it. You may temporarily be able to tamp it, to kill whatever vessel is carrying the evil at that moment, but you'll never be able to defeat evil itself. And that is a profoundly disturbing message to leave with at the end of a movie.
No, I totally agree. I haven't seen it in a long time. Like it's
good.
Yeah, it's one I got to put on the rewatch list. I feel like every week I'm adding new movies to my rewatch list or to my watch list. Letterboxd list is getting long here. My number 2 is a movie that I think you can essentially call it is a remake, and it is also a reboot. So it kind of fits in both molds. So technically I am cheating even though we've established that we're going off the rails here and we're doing our own rules. So the original film was kind of, let's put the Rat Pack together. Let's have a movie that's kind of inconsequential and just you have big movie stars put together. That kind of model gets elevated. But then when you add Steven Soderbergh to the mix, who figured out his sort of mold, I think, out of sight, and how to make these big kind of caper films with movie stars and make them equal parts sexy and entertaining at the same time. And that's Ocean's 11. I think Ocean's 11 is one of the most rewatchable films of all time. The 2001 version. It's a 5-star movie. It is one of those movies I have watched constantly. I dropped the remote, as people say. It's a remote drop. I've watched it at home. I watched it on a plane. I watched it pretty much everywhere. And this movie just moves from the moment it starts. It knows exactly what it's trying to do. It is just this incredibly captivating showcase for the great film stars that we have working today, period. You have Clooney at the height of his powers. You have Pitt right before he starts doing like Mr. and Mrs. Smith and a bunch of action films and different stuff. You have Damon right before Bourne Identity. You have Julia Roberts right off the Oscar, or right about to have the Oscar. Andy Garcia, Don Cheadle, for the world had like the real second coming of who Don Cheadle really is. You have Casey Affleck before he's big. You have Scott Conn before he's big. You have Bernie Mac, one of the funniest comedians on the planet. You had Elliot Gould, which is like a tie back to like California Split, a movie that was very influential in sort of the editing process of how Soderbergh made this film, the great Robert Altman film. And then you have, you just have all these other pieces that are added to it, these perfect character actors that are put in there. And the movie is been said by Clooney and the cast to be the time of their life. For Soderbergh, this was immense hell to put this movie together. And because it's not easy to put a movie like this where it looks like they're all having fun and that they're all just essentially like on vacation. But Soderbergh was doing a much more intricate film to that. And he was making a heist film that is a send up to all the great directors that have ever made heist movies before, like, you know, like Rafifi or even something like Thief. And he has all these influences that he's trying to put in this movie, while also making it extremely accessible for the studio, because this is for the studio. And he essentially started adapting the model that I think a lot of modern filmmakers have done, because he had done a lot of small films and then he did Out of Sight, and Out of Sight wasn't this big hit, but it felt like that was the audition to make a movie like this. And he successfully makes one of the more famous films of that year, one of the most box office successful films of that year, while also being a really fucking good movie. He makes 2 sequels. I think Ocean's 12 rules. I think Ocean's 13 is a kind of a retread of 11, but it's still a lot of fun. You get a great Pacino performance in there. I believe Ellen Barkin as well was in there too. She's great. Just kind of had this little trilogy had a lot of fun, but that first film is so good, and it's so and just all the stories you hear about Soderbergh like pulling his hair out, especially even on 12. He already made this movie. This movie was so successful, and then they're all like having fun at like George's house, and he's like, how the hell am I going to put this thing together, because the script makes no damn sense. And that's what's kind of the brilliant thing about it, is that he kind of finds it in the edit. And that's how then Soderbergh then becomes even more of a hands-on editor and a cinematographer as things go on in his career. So yeah, and then of course it gets a reboot or a legacy sequel, I guess you could say, with Ocean's 8, which is still a fun movie. It's not nearly to the level of this, because Gary Ross is not Steven Soderbergh. No. But it's still a fun movie with a fun cast. Hard movies to make. But Ocean's 11, clearly a movie that I absolutely love. And is a movie that from its original, you would think like, I don't know if you can touch that, because that was such a cultural piece for the Rat Pack to make a movie together. But it's a movie that can be better than the original, as opposed to the pick for worst reboot, which is a remake essentially and a reboot of a franchise that they got it right the first movie and have never needed to touch it since, and that is the Jurassic World films, but then also Jurassic Park, where that's a movie where every sequel, even the Spielberg sequel, and then Jurassic Park 3, we learned then to leave these things alone because Spielberg got it right in the first go round, never really needed to touch it again. Jurassic World has just been a cash grab, sort of very thankless, terrible movies. It's given us Colin Trevorrow, which then we got Book of Henry. Congratulations on that. But then also that means
thank you, universe.
But then also that means we also got The Rise of Skywalker because of all these bad things that have happened. So it's a real trickle down effect that Colin Trevorrow has done here. It is the complete opposite of an Ocean's 11, where a remake is a great thing, and every one of these has been essentially a remake of the original, and they've never had that wow factor that Spielberg had. So Ocean's 11, Jurassic World, also too, just like one of the most, they're so unnecessary. These movies are so unnecessary, as opposed to like, I can watch probably maybe like 10 more Oceans movies because they're just so much fun and entertaining, even if they're not as good as the 2001 film. It's just something about getting a bunch of stars together and having a heist and having fun with it. Like, they're good. These, on the other hand, are like, please stop. Even bringing in this last one, Dominion, last year, bringing in the original cast literally in the same clothes as they were in the first film. It's so uncanny valley that it's got to stop. So
yeah, Ocean's 11, talk about a rewatchable. Just like how well that movie works. And at the time thought of, it's like, why is Steven Soderbergh right after Traffic, making this kind of trifle? But think of just how well that movie works. And the sequels too. Like,
they're great.
Each one of them. And yeah, I think Jurassic World is one of the worst franchise reboots I've ever seen, and Dominion is somehow even worse than
Fallen Kingdom. Just as bad. Makes no sense. They're all bad.
They're bad, yeah, and it really is just like, what purpose does this serve?
It really just money. Every one of them tarnish, I feel like, the legacy. Mm-hmm. And what's really funny about Ocean's 11 is it kind of makes you think that original film is better than it actually is, because it's actually not that great.
Yeah.
And so it's fascinating when you have a real director behind the camera making decisions like Soderbergh, who can elevate maybe past mistakes, and then a movie like movies from Trevorrow and others that are easily trying to copy something like Spielberg, but have no originality or imagination that something like that can create. So, but go pop them in right now.
Well.
Yeah, go pop them in right now. I'm sure everybody will enjoy that. Zach, you're number one.
My number one is a film that was a remake that was so good that it itself was actually remade in recent years. It's a remake of a 1951 sci-fi horror film credited to Christian Nyby, but actually directed by Howard Hawks.
Mm-hmm.
One of the great acolytes of Howard Hawks is John Carpenter. And in 1982, he made his masterpiece, which is The Thing.
Yeah.
What more can I say about this movie that hasn't already been said? A movie that was despised when it came out, basically ended Carpenter's career as a major studio filmmaker. Took from him the ability to command big budgets, to not have to essentially do everything on his own, as he so often has had to do. And yet, its legacy has endured to the point where it was remade in 2010. Like, this remake was remade, not nearly as well, but it just goes to show
Talk about one of the worst remakes I've ever seen.
Yeah, but it just goes to show you how much this film has cemented itself as an all-timer. And that's why I was like, when I was thinking about what to put at the top of the list, it was the very first film that came to my mind, because I was like, this is a Halloween standard, right? People love this movie.
I got the 4K. I got the 4K sitting on top of on like our TV stand.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the films that we're going to watch here throughout the month. So
one of the best looking movies ever made, shot by Dean Cundey.
Just
speaking of Jurassic Park,
just incredible, but like incredible. Just a movie that I've seen many times, but I still feel it's almost like Alien. I just feel like I know the turns of the camera, I know the lingering shots, and yet I'm horrified. It is a true piece of horror masterwork by Carpenter, who is, I think, one of the most patient directors with the camera ever. Doesn't matter the genre. He builds tension so well. And I think that's his defining legacy. He may not like Barbie, but The Thing is a hell of a movie.
He just said he didn't know who Alan was, and I can't,
And I don't think you can relate because you definitely know who Alan is.
Exactly. Yeah, I am. If you don't know an Alan, you probably are the Alan.
Maybe John Carpenter is the Alan, and he just doesn't know.
I don't know. But also, I would say, like, this movie is a good bookend to my number 5 pick, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because they're both about fear of what you can't see. Yeah. And you know that there is evil lurking within, these individuals, and you don't know who might be carrying the disease that could come and get you at any point. It ends in this apocalyptic way with the men knowing that they're all going to die, but they have to do whatever they can to keep this evil from spreading.
Mm-hmm.
But can they actually? Right?
Yeah.
And so, it's such a perfect, tightly made movie. Some of the best scares, some of the grossest scenes in any movie. Just like, remember that shot with the defibrillator?
I try to forget that shot. Thanks. No, but it's not my favorite of his. It's definitely up there. It's like,
what's your favorite?
I think the original Halloween is
that's like my number 2.
But Escape
Halloween.
But Escape from New York's up there too. I like all three. He's that will be someone we talk about one day on Director Watch. I have no doubt in my mind when it comes to that we will talk about. We'll talk about John Carpenter. He's got such a fascinating career.
His movies are tight as hell. Like,
they really
honestly,
are.
They're so.
I don't know how he pulls it off. Sometimes, to be fair, it's quite impressive. He's an impressive dude.
You know what it is? It's like so many of these reboots that the bad reboots you're talking about. Mm-hmm. They really would have done well to take a page from Carpenter's books, because it's like you think about these movies, they're like 90 minutes max. The Thing is like hour 45 maybe, so it's like a Carpenter epic, right? But they're just these like lean, mean, just cut down to the bone, get to the point. His like weird B movie brain kept him from adding too much unnecessary junk to it, and yet at the same time the filmmaking is so good and so meticulous that it elevates it above just being like disposable trash.
Yeah, his movies have something to say, and yet they don't try to over-explain themselves in I think the best way. And I think that's the problem with a lot of these. They think they need to set up so many rules in these remakes or try to reestablish what this all is, and it almost feels like they don't actually watch the original film in order to understand, because you're talking about like the Invasion and then the Thing remakes. Those movies lose a lot of what is special about those films in the 70s and 80s, is because it's like you're not building tension here, you're almost mimicking tension. Like one person watched the movie and said, this is kind of what I'm doing, let's do it based off of memory, rather than try to take this property and create something new with inside of it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think that the best versions of those. It's really hard in horror, I think, to you've mentioned 5 of them, but a lot of them are remakes that are from the past, like modern remakes now. They're trying to play so much on nostalgia that they lose the sense of originality. Like a movie like The Fly, where you were talking about earlier, that's a movie that Cronenberg essentially makes a Cronenberg movie with a property and says, I've seen this film, here's how I would do it. And I don't think that people do that nowadays. You talked about David Gordon Green earlier. This is a guy that's like, I've seen Friedkin's film and I've seen Carpenter's movies. I don't know what a David Gordon Green film looks like, but I'm going to try to do my best to make essentially that experience for you again, instead of taking those rules and kind of bending them to his will or making something interesting or whatnot. I mean, those Halloween movies are a disaster for a reason,
Yeah.
So
Well, Carpenter probably got his checks, so
he did, and he helped with, I guess, a new part of the score or something on that. So
yeah,
he was weirdly happy with it. I don't know. This movie sucked. Okay, best and worst franchise remakes, reboots of all time. So I think that we just got out of an era where it's going to be very hard to reboot what we just went through with one of the oldest franchises that we have on the planet. And it's going to take time for us to find a new man in a tuxedo with a gun under his pillow. Because I think what happened in 2005, 2006 with Casino Royale was a revelation for the Bond franchise when Daniel Craig stepped in and rebooted a franchise that was at a very low point. You're talking about Die Another Day, which is, a really bad movie, bad Madonna song. Sorry, Eric. Just like a bad all around. Pierce Brosnan looked like a shell of himself in that movie. Halle Berry couldn't save it. It's just a really bad movie. And took a long time for them to find someone. They found Craig. Had a lot of backlash as to, oh, he's blonde and da-da-da-da-da and this and this and that. And Mission Impossible, the Bourne franchise, those movies, as you know, the spy genre, it sort of felt like it was passing by. James Bond, in stepped this movie. I don't know what you think about it, Zach, but Casino Royale, I think, freaking rules.
I think it's maybe my second favorite Bond, maybe even my favorite. It's like that, Goldfinger,
right up there.
Skyfall, From Russia with Love, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, like.
Well, and that's the thing.
Yeah.
Because you can, obviously, this is a remake or recontextualization of the Casino Royale brand, but this also weirdly has a lot of connective tissue, I believe, to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is a movie about Bond essentially falling in love and getting out of the business, only for Blofeld in that case, but in this case, I guess essentially Blofeld again, Inspector, that we find out later in this most convoluted way. Because that's the thing about Bond. It's like things get found out in convoluted ways. So you just kind of got to roll with it. But it essentially shows Bond as a real human. And I think that that's what's so great about the story, not the film, the story of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I do not like that film. I love that story.
I like that film.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Lazenby. But I get why people. I think the story is what really carries people over because it's such a mature and it's such a different swing from what Connery's doing at the time. This is obviously a very different swing from Brosnan. It's kind of leaning more towards back to Timothy Dalton, which they felt at the time was not the right thing to do. Very dark, serious Bond, right? In the 80s, and those movies are incredible. And he should have been Bond for like 15 more years. But Craig, he gets this movie. The action's incredible. Martin Campbell, who did GoldenEye, comes back and does this. And then he's able to kind of, in a very rocky road, I would say, for like one movie's good, one movie's bad, one movie's good, one movie's okay. His ending, he goes on a very high note, I think, in No Time to Die. But Casino Royale, I agree with you. It's like top 3, top 2 Bond films, and it reestablished like, no, this franchise that we've seen it go through many iterations can still have the potential, and now the potential going forward with whoever steps into that suit to be able to reinvent itself for a new generation and be able to still be relevant now 60 years later, which is impressive. Mm-hmm. I just suppose that to a franchise that hasn't had a heartbeat since the 90s and has been trying to reinvent or remake itself multiple times. And the reason why it's because of that, it goes back to what you were saying about not having with your picks. They lost the creative visionary behind it. So when movies like Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, when Terminator Salvation, when Terminator Genesis, when Terminator Dark Fate comes out, regardless if it has Cameron's seal of approval, if he's not writing or directing those movies, they're not Terminator movies.
Nope.
And I think what's happened to the Terminator franchise is one of the worst things ever, because they have a fascinating commentary to them. I used to be a very anti-James Cameron movie, and then I've grown up to realize that James Cameron is right up there with Michael Mann as the two greatest, I think, directors of action films in the modern era, if not the two greatest action directors of all time.
Yep.
And those movies are inventive, and they're fun, and they have a soul, and they have technology that is moving the needle forward for generations to come. The CGI work with in T2 is what then gets us to the Matrix and gets us to Phantom Menace and gets us the sound, to gets us to Dolby Sound and all the shit that we now take for granted. That movie is the building block for a generation to come. The first Terminator movie is this gritty, almost Carpenter-esque B movie that is a terrifying horror movie. And then to subvert the audience with T2, it has never hit a high point like that. Cameron has, with True Lies and then Titanic and obviously Avatars, he has done perfectly fine himself, and doesn't have a problem saying so. But this franchise has never been able to find its heartbeat because it's selling with McG and all these other directors that don't have the visual lens and creativity story-wise to make something worth a damn. And so that's why this franchise is in the shitter and will remain in the shitter, because it also is continuously trying to resequelize and remake itself when it's not reinventing anything. And so, yeah, James Cameron kind of ruined them and ruined this property because he doesn't want to touch it. I think T2 is kind of a perfect ending because it does
sort of made a movie that was so good that no one could ever top it.
No, because like that movie kind of ends, and it ends with them completing the mission.
Yeah.
So what the fuck is the purpose of anything else that comes after it? It is just to make money.
Mm-hmm.
And they haven't made a lot of money off of these things. So stop doing it, because every time you do it, it's a bad idea. So
I love that all it took was Piacon to get you to finally come around on camera.
I mean, I was mad. A lot of times I'm also mad at him because he keeps putting his executive producer name attached to him. He's like, this is the best one since T2. It's like, you said that one the last time, James. It feels, but he's also doing that at the deck of making Avatar 3. Like he's never not like doing it on like not a sound stage. So it's like clearly they've got a gun to his head and like, say that you like this movie, James. And it's like, I bet you he doesn't. I bet you he didn't like a single bit of it.
I did sort of like that last one with I can't remember it, but it was like the Lady Terminator.
Dark Fate.
Was it Dark Fate?
It's with Linda Hamilton.
The one where Linda Hamilton came back.
does
Yeah. Yeah. See, this is the thing. It's like I can't remember all the.
Yeah, you can't remember all of it. But then there's like the Amelia Clark one, which is Genesis, which is like almost a Lego sequel, and she plays Sarah Connor. And then there's the McGee one, which is Salvation, which has Christian Bale and
giving the Christian Bale the performance when he was screaming at that guy.
So that's the legacy of that.
The performance of his career.
But I just think that yeah, it's a franchise that has tried to been rebooted so many times. And I think I think audiences are smart enough to know when it's from James Cameron and when it's not. And when it's not from James Cameron, they don't give a shit. When it is from James Cameron, they give it $2 billion. Mm-hmm. It's been the last 3 movies. So there's been 4 Terminator movies since that movie's come out. There's been 4 James Cameron movies, I believe, and they've all been pretty damn successful. So
yeah.
The moral of the story is James Cameron, good at his job. The people that own the property of Terminator, not so much. So.
Yeah, not so much. Yeah. I love your pick of Casino Royale, by the way, and because this is a franchise that's been rebooted
so many times.
You could say technically, 5 times at this point? With
6, 5, 6, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, all right, post Connery, it's Lazenby.
More.
When Connery comes back, then it's more.
More comes back. I mean, Connery comes back.
Yeah.
And so technically, it's like almost like reclaiming, rebooting.
Yeah. Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan. Yeah, so it's like it's been rehashed many different times, and I think that what made Casino Royale so successful was that it was for the same reason that made Batman Begins so successful. It's like, we need a new angle on this because otherwise we're not going to be able to compete with modern action films. And we're going to look like dinosaurs. And I think that's what you really need to do. Again, like I keep coming back to this, you really need to figure out like, why is the reason that you want to remake this or reboot this in today's day and age? What new angle do you have on it? And it was just like, let's go back to basics with James Bond. Let's figure out who he was before he became this guy with all the gadgets and
the girls, the cars.
And it worked. That movie's great.
And I mean, also too, it's like, okay, we'll start with Martin Campbell, who we're familiar with as the series goes on. And they got Mark Frost, which is like or Forrest or whatever his name is.
Whatever his name is.
And then,
Mark Frost
Forrester or whatever his name. That's right. Finding Neverland guy. And then they got Mendes, who is a more established filmmaker, can work on that level. First one worked very successfully. You can debate whether Spectre's good or not. For Bond fans, it certainly is not the worst thing we've ever seen. But then, like Fukunaga does No Time to Die, they're sort of now leaning into having some directors come in and give these movies some flair, but also they gave Craig a lot of say on this franchise going forward. So it'll be interesting, whoever does take it. There's rumors of Aaron Taylor Johnson, but there could be anybody at this point. If they'll have that much say, as well as also, who will be the director that kind of helms this going forward. Will they kind of take that approach too, of allowing a big director to come and take over this property? Obviously, there's been like rumors of like Nolan for years and years and years. I don't buy any of those, but nor thinks that he needs to make a James Bond movie. I think they would probably need Christopher Nolan more than he needs them.
Exactly.
And I also think that's an opportunity to give somebody else maybe a really great chance. Like, I love him. I don't think he needs to make this kind of transition, but I would love to see what like someone like a Steve McQueen would do with the Bond world, because like I saw what he could do with Widows, and that was pretty goddamn great there. You know what I mean? And so, and it doesn't also have to be limited to British directors either, because of the fact that Fukunaga was the first American, so they branched out with it. It really needs to, going forward, be a good fit. Bond's always been able to kind of at least find, there's always a good entry into the Bond world, and usually every Bond has their first film is pretty good. Like, you talk about Dr. No and On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Living Daylights, GoldenEye, Casino Royale. Forgot what Moore's first film. Maybe it's Live and Let Die.
It was Live and Let Die, which I like a lot.
Which a lot of people really like. So
yeah,
it'll be very interesting. Maybe that continues to streak. Maybe it doesn't. But it's kind of like the remake reboot of all remake and reboots. You have any honorable mentions you want to talk about?
Yeah. So
some good, some bads.
My number 6 that was really difficult for me not to have on the list. I can't believe I would not talk about this movie. Is Paul Schrader's Cat People.
Oh yeah, it's kind of again. We got to talk about Schrader at a certain point on Director Watch too.
We really do. One of the horniest movies ever made.
Yeah, it is.
And like, you want to talk about a movie that is just like ties in sex and violence in really weird ways? Talk about Cat People. Mm-hmm. It truly was between. I was like, shoot, do I put this in or do I put in Invasion of the Body Snatchers? But it was just like Invasion of the Body Snatchers is such a perfect movie, that it was impossible for me to not have it on. A more recent remake I had on there was Let Me In. Speaking of Matt Reeves, this was a movie that really surprised me because I was like, why would anyone want to remake Let the Right One In? And I think it's actually better than the original. Just being honest.
I would agree.
I like that movie a lot.
Me too. Matt Reeves, pretty good at his job.
Yeah, kind of a good director, gotta say. And the remake of Suspiria, Luca Guadagnino.
Oh man,
just like
we just talked about that last week on the 2018 show. What a great movie!
And yeah, I was so bummed I could not come on that episode because of work, because I wanted to put Tilda Swinton in my supporting actress lineup so badly. But yeah, I mean, again, like totally different from the original, just completely new and unique take on this material. And I mean, like there's all kinds of things. Like there's any number of Hammer horror films I could have put in here, any number of Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe adaptations that I could have put in here. When you really dig underneath the surface, you find a lot of good horror remakes, much more so than you would today.
Yeah, I would argue with you, or I wouldn't argue with you. I'd add to you. I think that the Fede Alvarez new version of Evil Dead, is a really that I think of the modern remakes of horror movies is what we're talking about. Taking a different approach, honor what's come before, but have an unholy, unhinged vision and create it. And I think like the new film that came out this year, I feel has more kinship to that Alvarez movie that came out. I know that one's more produced by Raimi and by Bruce Campbell, but that original remake, I think is really great, and in a movie that kind of still ties into the universe as well too. Like there's this whole conspiracy theories. Now there's like 3 different books of the dead, and they're all going to come together at a certain point and whatnot. And maybe they'll do that in 1 year or whatnot. But that to me, I think is a great example. I think of like terrible examples, at worst. I mean, obviously the David Gordon Green Halloween reboot is awful, as well as the Rob Zombie versions of the Halloween. They're both of a vision that is completely devoid of any originality, and I think even as bad as story wise these David Gordon Greens are, the harshness of the Rob Zombie films make it those unbearable watches from just day one. And then I mean, obviously the 1998 Godzilla movie, which is I mean, there's so many great Godzilla monster movies. And that movie's just god awful. Truly doesn't make sense halfway through it. It's a mess. I think about the A Nightmare on Elm Street with the Jackie Earle Haley version. which is just, I mean, talk about, I think, one of the great Wes Craven horror movies of all time.
Yeah.
And then this new thing is just gobbledygook. I haven't been a fan of these new Scream movies that have been coming out. I think the original Scream is a pretty great movie. I think its sequels, I think every Scream movie that's come after is kind of either just been kind of lesser or not really that great. Because there's just something truly inherently special about the first Scream. And I know that there's a lot of fans out there about the Scream franchise, so I'm not going to keep going, but I think the new ones, these sort of legacy sequel ones, are not truly inventive, and
the fact that they did not pay Neve Campbell her money.
That one, yeah.
This one was just
bullshit. Yeah. Like, it's really stupid. And so and also just doesn't take any ideas, like the whole like being New York model of this new one, and it really just feels very limited after what they do with it. It's I'm not a fan of them. We want to just talk about franchises in whole that I think are terrible kind of reboots. I think these whole Disney live action movies have been a disaster.
You think?
And it really all has been at the feet of a movie like Alice in Wonderland, which I think is an abomination, and something that I wouldn't allow Eric's team to watch because I care for them. But no, I think that that's been like the real modern horror is having to watch these uncanny valley versions of animated films that are perfect and need to stay that way, and then seeing these disaster pieces that have been brought to us. Like I think of this, or the Beauty and the Beast film, or The Lion King, which is just trash. And so I don't know if those are necessarily reboots, but they're definitely remakes, quote unquote, and they're just terrible. So, and then it's not a remake of any movie that I know of, but it's always a great story to talk about. Bill Murray signing up to take the Garfield movies, which is off this property, and thought it was the Coen brothers, and it was the other Coen brothers.
What a king!
Yeah,
just a true legend.
Just complete. What a ding dong.
Well, he might have had he might have been imbuing a couple of liquid substances at the time. When
I think you kind of have to. I think you kind of have to. I've heard good things about. I haven't seen the film, but I've heard good things about Saw X, the new movie that came out this year, which I've heard is a movie that kind of reboots a dying franchise as well. I know they tried that with Spiral. I didn't really like that, but I've heard.
I've heard good. Say it's the reboot of the reboot.
It's the reboot of the reboot, but I've heard good things about it. At least it kind of brings back to that original film and everything there. But yeah. That's it. That's our best and worst franchise remake reboots that of all time. So we'll never talk about it again.
I think we covered it.
I think we did it. We don't need the team. See, we don't need everybody else. See, we got this.
Do you hear that, guys? You can all quit.
No, I didn't say that. I just that was Zach who said that, and he's fired.
Yeah.
But right. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm not gonna. Yeah. No, we love you, Zach. We love everybody. It's just it was a busy week. Speaking of that, it happens. But I was glad to do this one with you, Zach. Can you tell everybody where they can find you and all your work on the internet?
Well, speaking of horror shows, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram, Letterboxd, Facebook at Zach Laws. That's ZACHLAWS. And you can find all my work at AwardsWatch, including the Exorcist review, which A+ headline for a C- movie.
Yeah. When you listen, over the next couple of weeks, we'll have a big piece coming up on the website that Zach and I and Sophia Simonella are working on, because we won't be here next week. Spoiler alert for that. But it will be up on the website. We're ranking the films of one Martin Scorsese in a written piece that'll be up on the website. And it's not done yet. but I am pretty confident that it will be great. Because
in honor of his great film Taxi Driver, we're writing it all out longhand in a notebook.
That's true. And
diary.
And I will do the monologuing for everyone. Very Paul Schrader-esque. But yes, go check out all Zach's work up on the website right now. For me, you can find me on the mess that is Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Ryan McQuade 77. If you love this show, you should listen to our other show that we have, Director Watch. We are in the midst of a Lynn Ramsey movie series. We just had Ratcatcher come out last week. This week we have Morven Caller. And the week after next, since we won't be here, we will have a review also of We Need to Talk About Kevin. So we will have back-to-back episodes of at least Director Watch the next couple of weeks. So you get that. And while you're over on the website, you can go ahead and sign up for our newsletter. We greatly appreciate that. It's just a simple click up on the website, click it, sign up. You get the latest, all the news that we cover, as well as reviews from all the festivals, podcast, everything all in one place, sent to you twice a week. We greatly appreciate that. We'd also greatly appreciate if you went on iTunes or on Spotify, gave us a 5-star review. We like 5-star reviews. They're what keep us warm at night as we head into the winter. And we greatly appreciate if you guys left 5-star reviews. You can also tell us what are your favorite best remakes or reboots, horror or otherwise. It doesn't matter. We'd love to hear it from you guys. And next week we won't be here, which is going to be sad. But then after that, we will be back to do a wrap up of the AFI Film Festival, because we'll be at regional festivals next week, myself, Eric, and the team. And then we'll be the following week at the AFI Film Festival to close out festival season. So we'll come back, we'll close that out, and then we'll also go ahead and give our thoughts on a little film called Killers of the Flower Moon. But until then, we will see you all next time.